Welcome to the Intimacy Liberation Army. I'm your host, Duke DeLate, and I'm a dating coach. Been around the world for 15 years teaching this shit, and decided I want to leave my legacy by going super deep and leaving all my brain on the internet before I move on to some sort of executive coaching thing. So 2025 is going to be about all of this, and today's topic is how to build self-awareness in 15 minutes a day. Over the last couple of days, we've been going over why self-awareness is good for relationships, why self-awareness is good for boundary setting, and all the cool stuff that has... I was looking for my phone. I'm filming with it. I'm an idiot. All the cool stuff that has great worth for you in your relational life, in your boundary setting, in your being able to understand the patterns of other people. And so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of how to build it through a daily practice and make it part of your daily routine so that you can easily and effortlessly move your way into a more self-aware existence. If you ever feel like your days are a blur, it leaves little time for self-reflection, you're always just hustling and bustling. If you build the self-awareness, if you look at it from a grand total perspective and you're like, okay, well, if I have to keep track of everything that's going on in my brain, it's going to be difficult because I have things to do, and there's introspection and self-awareness is a practice that if you don't practice much as you're coming up, you don't have the skill set as you move forward. So we're going to give you a couple of tools to add to your daily routine today that will help you move towards self-awareness, right? Just like we kind of talked about in the first 3 days of this thing or 2 days of this thing, self-awareness is really the ability to understand your own emotions, your interactions, your reactions, and your behaviors, like why you do the things that you do. It's the foundation of all your personal growth, and it's really what knowing yourself and being self-aware is what will build your better relationship. It's what's going to create the emotional resilience and your, what's the word? Emotional resilience and self-regulation. That's what it is. Your ability to kind of like stop, don't let your triggers fire off and control you, and then make good decisions based on the information at hand, based on the new things that are happening in your environment, not just click were affecting your old childhood patterns, right? So with a couple of these simple exercises, daily habits, you can kind of tune yourself in, you can uncover your own patterns, you can be cognizant of what's going on in your head and not letting that subconscious part run you. And you can make some meaningful changes with your day-to-day, controlling how you respond and how you behave. So if you're ready to just get to it, sorry, my brain's a little fried there now. Yeah, let's get to it. First thing is why self-awareness matters, right? In this particular episode, we're going to talk about understanding your emotions helps you make better decisions. Improving your relationships comes from a place of understanding your patterns and the other people's patterns. And your decision-making skills get better because you have more data to make your decisions off of, right? From the understand your emotion side, if you identify your feelings before they escalate, before you let your subconscious come out with all of your, coping patterns, then you're able to have conversations with a more even keel. I told a story yesterday of one of my partners. She was asking me a bunch of things and try to rile me up, and I was like, no, this is why I believe the way that I do, and this is why I've made these decisions. And if you want to talk about it outside of those things that I've already made a decision on, then we can feel free. But I'm really self-aware of why I made the decision. I didn't just like do it willy-nilly, right? And I was able to maintain kind of an even keel in that relationship or in that conversation. And she wasn't going to throw me off my game, right? Because she wanted to feel something that was not really the solution that she was projecting, right? She just like, move in with me. I'm like, no, right? And then she wanted to escalate to a point of like, oh, why? And I had very good reasons. I knew why I didn't want to make that decision. And outside of, I'm open for a discussion and, if you want to bring new things to the table, but, all of the old things to the table, I've already made my decision. I understand this, right? And it allowed me to just sort of not cold and hard, but like calmly and cool, just have the discussion. And then she dropped it, and she will probably come back at some point with new data because she knows that that's what I want to respond to, and that's fine. I mean, I'll make that decision then. So self-awareness. If you understand why you feel the way you feel, you can make better. You can articulate your decisions better to the people in front of you, so that you don't get triggered by all of their little manipulation tactics. The communication in general is a power game. Like we're always trying to manipulate the other person into seeing our point of view or doing the things that we want them to do. It's not an evil thing to be manipulative. However, the closer we can get on the same page, and the better we can articulate ourselves in the conversation, the less likely we are to use tools that are going to injure the relationship, like throwing guilt and shame and especially like kind of judging your perspective from a moral high ground, right? If we start doing those things and we sort of induce fear into our communication, it works for the manipulation side, but it doesn't work to keep the stability of the relationship solid for a long time. And so it's just much more effective to communicate, even if you have to disagree, even if you have to endure the other person getting pissed off. It's more effective to communicate clearly and articulate your reasoning, and because people can't fight you on the reasons that are attached to your values. They can fight, but they're not going to budge you, right? Because they're part of your core, right? But if you don't know what your core is, what your core values are, and then you try to say, I don't want to do that. Well, why? I just don't want to. Like, don't fucking push me on this. And it starts to escalate, and nobody gets any resolution because you can't back up your statement. Even if it's like, I don't feel like it and I'm trusting my intuition. I've learned that trusting my intuition is the best case for me most of the time. Like, even that is a clear, articulate response. And people will have to work around that in the future if they want to manipulate you or lead you to a place that they want. So understanding your emotions is one of the key points of the self-awareness thing. If you just sort of assume the world is the way it is and your response is natural and everybody should feel like you do and everybody should respond like you do, then you're going to have a lot of issues coming in with other people with different perspectives, different value systems. And so if you understand why you believe what you believe, you can put that out in the arena with clarity, and then people have to contend with that rather than just try to mow you over because your belief system's shaky, right? Secondly, self-awareness is going to improve your relationships for two reasons. I've already gone over like the ability to set boundaries and all that stuff, but two really good reasons is communication when it's clear, and your when you know what the fuck you want to do and then you communicate it, then they have to contend with your intent, right? And so communication is better because you can articulate it, you understand the reasons why of things, and you can put those things out on the table so that you guys can co-create a solution together. Sometimes they won't, but it's definitely a better way to go about it than to just put your foot in the sand and be stubborn and be like, you can't push me around like this and da 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 da. It's weak because there's no value system behind it. And so self-awareness will bring you to the point of understanding your value system and being able to articulate it. And then they have to contend with that, right? And they're like, oh yeah, he's the kind of person who doesn't put up with this because of these reasons. And a little crooked here. And then, so now I have to come back with a different thing, right? When they understand that you're going to stand your ground because of your value system, it's a different strength in the conversation than you're standing your ground just to be stubborn, right? Because then they're not going to feel respected, right? So that's the first reason. The first reason it improves your relationships is you're able to be clear. It creates better communication. The second reason is that it allows you to be empathetic. If you understand your value system and then somebody comes at you with a value system that isn't your own, you'll be able to recognize that and be like, okay, well, let me put myself in your shoes for a minute. Why do you believe that? Because I believe this, right? You can have that conversation, or you can even have that conversation in your own head. When I really got into trauma work, I got certified as a trauma-informed coach, and I studied Peter Levine a lot, a bunch of when I read Van der Kolk's books and got down the PTSD route, and then I moved into trauma-informed therapy, which is it's interesting. I'm not sure about the efficacy in more. Anyway, I got into that, but I stepped into attachment theory, and from an academic perspective, it's probably the fastest growing body of research in psych at the moment, right? There's a lot of people studying a lot of things and how it relates to a lot of things over the last 10, 15 years. And I began to understand that some people will operate from a completely different mindset than I do. When I started the attachment theory stuff and I took the inventory, I realized that I was ridiculously anxiously attached. Like I definitely was seeking approval and validation everywhere, even in my strength. Like even as a world-class jiu-jitsu competitor, and even as a traveling dating coach and entrepreneur and all that stuff. When I got into it, probably 2016 or whatever, most of my issues revolved around trying to prove myself, and that's why I did the whole quit my job and fly around the world and be one of the guys on YouTube with 900,000 subscribers and all that stuff. I just was looking for things to prove that I was good enough, right? And so my whole mentality was moving in this anxiously attached direction. Every relationship I had, even though I had a lot of sex with a lot of girls and I did a lot of dating and I did a lot of multiple partner dating and all this other stuff, a lot of that was just to kind of prove, okay, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, to myself. And as I started moving towards more secure attachment with the help of going through all the detachment literature, and then a lot of these YouTubers who are, who was it, Tice Gibson really nailed down a lot of stuff about attachment theory for me. I started moving towards securely attached, and then a lot of those needs that I needed to do to prove myself kind of just fell off. And on a day-to-day, I don't look back at myself and be like, oh, I'm way different than I was 5-10 years ago. I really am. Like, my daily motivations are completely different. The things that I find important and the ways that I seek to be accepted and chase validation are wildly different, right? I'd always had this thing where on the who was it? It was David Data. He was saying a man's purpose has to be number one. And a man's generativity has to be rolled up in his purpose, and then his woman and his family has to be number two. And if they ever flip roles, then the woman will lose respect, and there will be a lack of polarity in the relationship. And so I believed this, but I didn't understand it. And so I made it my mission to always stick to my mission and who I was, regardless of what you think about it. And I made this big hem and haw about it. And it worked for a long time because I polarized and I had a lot of attraction. And I was dating these girls that were really in awe of the fact that I was willing to burn everything to the ground to do what I wanted to do. And it worked quite a bit, especially from a game perspective. It's like if you want to, have abundance in sexual partners, you'll be your own man, and you'll have to. Okay, great, but I didn't understand why it worked. And once I moved more towards secure attachment, I was like, holy shit, like that was all a big mask, even though it was very real for me at the time. And as I came here, my needs are different. My purpose is still number one, but it's not at odds anymore. I don't know. This is hard to explain, but I used to think that I had to defend my purpose and my mission in life against everything else. And my solidarity in defense was going to be the game changer. But then I realized as I moved more towards the secure attached side, I was like, holy shit, like my purpose is just my purpose and I'm going to do it. I don't have to defend myself. Like it's just there. And you can argue about it all you want. It's just not going to budge. Sorry. And from a 10,000 foot view, both of those things look like they're the same thing. But people, my partner and other people, they all treat me very differently than they used to when I used to, like, no, see, this is my thing. No, you can't cross my boundary because that is my thing. And I had all this narrative. And now I'm just like, no, that's what I do. And they're like, yeah, well, what do you think about it? Like, yeah, okay. Right? There's no, it just kind of falls off because the part of me that's being defensive or the part of me that believes the things that they're saying are true don't really affect me anymore because I'm just like, yeah, no, I understand where I'm at, right? And that's part of the self-awareness thing. We were talking about how it improves your relationships, understanding that you have a unique perspective and then understanding that other people have their own unique perspectives allows you to have empathy and put yourself in their shoes. Because once I realized that I was anxiously attached and I needed to move more secure, I started moving that direction and doing the things for self-care and all the trauma work and getting hypnotized and pulling my childhood bullshit out. I had a conversation with my mom and cleared up a lot of the stuff and the grudges I was holding against her. I reconciled everything with my dad. I did all the stuff, right? And as I became kind of my own person who was secure in his own self, I stopped seeking all playing all the games to get validation and stuff from the anxious attached side. But then I realized that my partner was avoidant, like hard, dismissive, avoidant. And the reason our relationship was so fiery in the beginning was because I was chasing all the time, trying to get validation, and she was pulling it back. And this is what they call the anxious avoidant trap in attached, right? And I was doing this, and I did this with a bunch of different relationships all at once. I was dating these 3 girls at one time, and all 3 of them were hyper anxiously attached or hyper avoidantly attached. And I was just constantly trying to get validation, little pieces and snippets from all 3 of them at once. And I was pretty fulfilled because I delegated out and distributed the work of validating my feelings to multiple people, and so they did, which is hilarious now looking back. But at the time, it was very real, and I realized I was doing this thing where I was just chasing down these people who didn't want to be chased, who didn't feel like their security, dismissive avoidance. Their security is in autonomy, in the ability to make their own decisions and act well, right? And they're constantly judging themselves for not being good enough, right? From the other side. And once I realized that I had a unique perspective as an anxious attached person, and they had a unique perspective as an avoidant attached person, and they were not the same perspective, I was able to have empathy for them in their spot, especially my current partner. I was like, oh shit, like she literally is afraid of everything and must control everything because otherwise she doesn't feel safe. Fuck. Right? Whereas I literally need to check in with everybody around me to make sure I'm good enough so that I feel safe. And she didn't operate the way I did, and I didn't operate the way she did. And I was like, oh shit, like she literally has a different brain than I do. And my self-awareness of where I was at and where I was moving to allowed me to see the what do you call it? The dichotomy between my viewpoint of the world, the way that I frame the world, and the way that she framed the world. And then I was able to kind of put myself in her shoes. I was like, okay, well, how do I work around this issue? Because very often I'd be like, okay, let's sit down, let's communicate, let's lay everything out, let's be super clear, so that I know what to expect and I can be a good boy, right? And she would be like, sitting down and talking makes me fucking yeah, and I just want to run away, right? And back then I judged it. I was just like, oh shit, like fucking, I'm not going to be with any woman who can't communicate. And da, 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 da. My rules are fucking the perfect rules of the world. And in real life, we all look at the world differently. And the more self-aware you are, the more you realize that the difference between you and other humans, maybe you are 99% like every other human in the world, but that 1% makes a big hell of a difference when you're dealing with some sort of insecurity or anxiety, right? So, self-awareness lets you have empathy, and it makes your relationships better because you can actually put yourself in their shoes for a minute and not just respond to the fact that your viewpoint isn't being supported. The third thing on why self-awareness matters to your relationship is it helps you in your decision making. And I talked about this at great length yesterday and the day before, so look at those videos if you want to deep dive into that. But basically, you don't act impulsively. You don't just respond from your subconscious triggers because you know what they are. So if you're like, oh shit, I feel like I'm being invalidated right now, the fear that comes behind that is actually that if I let them invalidate me now like this, they're going to make that a pattern and they're just going to validate me every time in the future. I'll never have any negotiation power. Okay, so my problem is I'm afraid that in the future, if I let this slide, okay, so how do I communicate that in a way that I'm running through the stuff in my brain and I realize I'm not making a lot of sense? So basically, all that to say, if you don't respond impulsively out of from your triggers and your standard coping mechanisms, and you think about it for a second, then you're allowed to make new decisions that are going to make the relationship in a better thing. I'm going to go into super depth on specific scenarios and stories and things that illustrate this concept later in the month, probably around the 15th. And so let's save that for that, so I don't run fucking an hour on this thing. Because this thing's about the day-to-day practices. That was all just kind of build up. So why self-awareness matters: you understand your emotions, you improve your relationships, and you boost your decision-making skills in real time. And the way to go about that from a day-to-day practice, yes, you can be the kind of person that is constantly checking in with yourself to make sure that you are measuring the inputs that come into the world against your own value system. But if you don't know your value system, it's very difficult to do any of that stuff. So I recommend to most of my clients, I was actually talking to a guy today, to start with the minimum viable thing, right? He was going out and approaching girls and doing all this stuff, and he was moving the goalposts, so it made a big deal out of everything, and he would fail or pass, and everything was. I was like, no, just go out this week. Make it consistent. Go out and say hi to one person, one girl. And you're working on the consistency, and what you're trying to do is get the things that are triggering you to come up so that you can evaluate those things and see if they're still useful. Because you don't want to be employing strategies that aren't useful to your current goals, right? The strategies that you learned in childhood. So as far as the self-awareness thing is concerned, a lot of times looking into yourself is scary. Your ego is trying to protect you from being some sort of like what's the word? You're not perfect, right? So your ego's saying like, no, you absolutely are, and you have to defend everything because this is your identity, and da da da. But like, it's not true. We're constantly shifting all the time. We're constantly learning new information. We're constantly running into new people and getting new input and growing. Like, I don't want to be the same mentally when I'm 50 when I was 20. Like I want to have learned a lot of shit and become a better human who can deal with life in a much better way. And so, where was I going with that? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, to go about doing that, to go about doing the self care thing, you want to do the minimum viable thing. And um, one of the best practices I've ever used for virtually anything, organization, for keeping my mind right, and and self awareness is journaling. And like I said yesterday, it seems really trite. Like, oh, everybody's like, journal, journal. If you ask ChatGPT, what do I do for self care? It's going to be like mindfulness, journaling, uh, uh, check in with your friends and family, right? Like, and people who know you the best, so that you have a good understanding from other people's perspectives. That's what it'll tell you. It's like so common to be like journal, 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 and nobody does it. Some people do, but most people don't. And uh, if you can make a practice of journaling, and you don't have to like necessarily get a pen and write shit down, like you don't have to like buy a moleskin journal and do all the little things like I do. You don't have to do all that shit. You can just like put voice notes in your phone. I did it in Notion for a long time. I would just like open Google Keep, do a voice recording and leave it in there, and then I would translate them. I moved from Keep to Notion a while back, and then I'd go into Notion and I'd drop notes, and I'd put little text things into reminders, and I'd categorize them, and that works too. Right? I've got an app that I was creating. I haven't released it yet. I think it's February. I haven't released it, but for the guys in my program to do better storytelling, to write down their story prompts, and then kind of practice the emotional sides of their storytelling, because a lot of the guys that hire me are super logical, so they get like real. They don't tell stories from an emotional place about how they feel. They're not vulnerable in that way, and so that the app is just like, okay, what's your story prompt? Here's some things to focus on. Tell your story. What are the emotional points, right? And they can record them in there, and they can go look back and see it, right? You can do the same thing in Notion. You can do the same thing in Keep. You can do the same thing in every